This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. No one goes into a marriage planning to divorce, yet 50% of all marriages in this country end up in divorce court. Today we'll look at some steps you can take before marriage to protect yourself in the event of a divorce. Our guests are Judge Walter Tollop, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in New York County. Judge Tollop sits in the matrimonial part itself. We also have Myrna Felder, a well-known matrimonial lawyer who represents famous and wealthy, I may add, clients. Hello, Judge Tollop. Hello, Myrna.
Thank you.
I'll be here. So, Judge, you heard the opening. How does one protect themselves against coming out of your court with no money?
Well, I'm not sure that's possible, but it's an anti-nuptial agreement, or a prenuptial agreement, as it's called, and people of means, even people of modest means, should protect themselves by entering into such an agreement before they get married. And the law will...
Excuse me for interrupting a judge. I'm interrupting
okay.
a judge. Would never do it in his courtroom. But here, I noticed that you started off by saying nobody enters a marriage planning for divorce. But you know that's really not true anymore. More and more, you have clients coming in, and that's exactly what they're planning for. They want to make sure that if there's a divorce, they don't get into
Myrna,
trouble.
is it basically people who've been married before, more established people, as opposed to the younger people?
20 years ago, it was people who had been married before, or the most typical pattern years ago was a person marrying for the second time wanting to protect the children of the first marriage, you know,
Right.
the wealth, make sure it goes to the children.
I've been through divorce
Completely
court
changed.
once. I don't want to do it again.
Right. And that, I've been through divorce court, but not anymore, because people are watching shows like yours, and they're hearing the chances are 50%, and they're thinking, well, 1 out of every 2 is going to get a divorce, and 1 out of 2 of that marriage wants to have some agreement to protect themselves.
And with equitable distribution in New York, a divorce proceeding with persons of means becomes a very, very long, complex, even persons without means, becomes a very, very long, complex, arduous proceeding. And if you can resolve a lot of these issues up front by virtue of an anti-nuptial agreement, you'll cut your time with your attorney, you'll cut your time in court, and you'll be in and out of the divorce process much quicker.
And you know, the other thing is that now you have such broad rights of discovery that you're able, for example, say a husband, let me make the husband the wealthy man, for a change. Okay, he's the spouse with the money.
I think I've heard this story before,
right,
yes.
is in business with his family. If there's no prenuptial agreement, when you go to that divorce, there's going to be financial discovery of the husband, the family, everybody. And so the family doesn't want it to be without a prenuptial either. They don't want to face that.
But Myrna, let's assume here we have a couple that has just gone through a wild, wonderful, romantic courtship. And they've decided
I'm thinking of that song, There Are Such Things, you know?
Yes. And then they decide, you know, we're made for each other.
Right.
And we want to get married.
Right.
And then he has to go get his lawyer, she go gets her lawyer, and what do? Fight out the terms?
Yeah, and the fact is that some of the bloom comes off the rose, but there usually is,
Right.
If they're not both in agreement, the spouse that has the potential of great wealth or really being very successful, many times is very anxious to protect those assets.
Judge, can you actually say in a prenuptial agreement or an antenuptial agreement, no maintenance for the spouse, for the non-spouse that's not working?
The test that we use basically is the agreement fair when it was entered into, and is it fair at the time that the decree is entered? Okay. If it's fair on both of those, at both of those points, then the agreement will be upheld.
So if it's, for example, let's assume the husband, again, very, very wealthy.
Yes.
And he marries someone who is just starting out in life and doesn't have much assets. can he put down that if we're married under 5 years, you end up with nothing? If you have 5 years to 10 years, you get so much and so much per week?
Yes, I've seen graduated agreements where after the first year you're entitled to X amount, second year Y amount, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Myrna, it was
Right.
written that Donald Trump, whether it's true or not, I don't know,
Right.
actually had to divorce Marla Maples, his wife,
Right.
at a certain point.
In order not
otherwise-
to go to the next gradation.
That's correct.
Now, most of these agreements, that is, the judge says on maintenance, you have to be fair and reasonable when made. When they track the length of the marriage, that is an attempt to be fair, because under our law, for example, a woman married 3 to 5 years usually doesn't get any maintenance, or not maintenance of any size. After that, the likelihood of maintenance keeps on going up. So when you have an agreement that says up until 5 years, nothing, after 5 years, such and such, you're really tracking what the law might be.
And the agreement goes beyond that. It can go into equitable distribution. It can cover all sorts of areas. I think the only area that you can't say that you can predetermine anything is really with regards to children, where the court has this overriding best interests of the child concept that it has to enforce, notwithstanding whatever you put into an agreement.
Let's take the same example, Your Honor. We have a husband-wife. The husband has the money. He says, listen, I'll buy the most magnificent co-op, and I'll pay it. I'll be in both our names. But can they still say that when it comes to splitting it up, you'll only get a certain percentage of it?
Yes, it can. The whole concept of equitable distribution means that whatever the title named is, it's not really relevant, because everything is in the marital pot under equitable distribution. So you can make any kind of arrangement in that contract that you wish.
Now,
Remember, the title doesn't mean anything anymore in New York State.
No matter...
Before 1980, if one side owned the car, if one partner owned the car, one partner owned the house, one partner had, there was a joint savings account, it would be divided literally at the time of the divorce as to who held title. We did away with that concept in New York. Now it's equitable distribution.
Myrna, if I'm a professional, I'm a lawyer,
Right.
and I'm getting married, can I put down in this prenuptial agreement that not only do you not get maintenance, but you don't get any share of my practice if we divorce?
yes, you can. And what you're getting to is that some of these agreements, although sustainable and will be valid as contracts, actually end up having one spouse quite disadvantaged by the agreement, because the law would do so much better in the absence of an agreement for that spouse. For example, your wife, if you acquired during the marriage a law practice or a law license, would have the right pretty much to half of the value. Now, if you have the practice or the license going in, that's premarital, that's your separate property anyway, without an agreement.
And by the way, the court favors these agreements for one very, very practical reason, which Myrna may or may not have touched on, and that's the fact that we've got to value your license, and that is a headache and a half. Equitable distribution is a marvelous, marvelous concept. When it comes to practicality and making these evaluations, it's very, very tough on the courts to make these precise calculations.
Well, it's not only my practice...
And it takes more lawyer time.
And it takes tremendous court time.
Right.
Jay, let's get back to something you said before. Can you put down an agreement if we're to have 2 children, I will give so much support if you get custody of the children?
No,
Is that-
the
that's-
support, see, now you're delving into that area that's exclusively the province, really, of the court. I am responsible for setting what is going to be sufficient for those children.
Can it be this way?
And you can't obviate that with an agreement.
If we have 1 child, as far as maintenance for you, you'll get so much. If we have 2 children, as far as maintenance
That's
for the
interesting.
space, you get additional money.
You don't usually see that, because the lawyers who draft these well stay away from areas that might make a hole in the agreement. In other words, might open it to a lawsuit that this is disguised child support, part of that
Myrna, can I
maintenance.
put in that prenuptial agreement, if I'm to die, you get nothing? You
Yeah.
have to waive your right of election?
By the way, that was the beginning of prenuptials in New York. Up until 1980, you heard the judge say that starting in 1980, we began having equitable distribution, no longer title. 1980 also was the first time you could put in an agreement maintenance, support, those aspects. So before 1980, the most frequent agreement was the millionaire husband providing that the wife would give up her elective share and would get nothing from an
In case he
estate.
dies. Judge, let's assume I'm married 15 years. Can I go to my wife and say, Darling, honey, you know I love you, but I want to enter into an agreement now, setting forth, just in case in 20 years if something happens between us, what each of us get.
You can?
Sure.
Sure.
It's called a postnuptial agreement.
Postnuptial agreement.
Also, for the first time in 1980, you could do that. Before 1980, they had to be separated. There had to be a separation agreement before spouses could contract. And you know why? Historically, they felt that the will of the husband was so supreme that a wife would not have the free will to contract. And let me tell you something. In a postnuptial agreement, there still is some of that. It's very hard for a woman to resist entering into these agreements.
Myrna, as a practical matter, I mean, how many of these agreements are you writing? How many people are really...
Tons.
Really?
You know what my husband, the great Rohlfelder, says?
I know your husband, the great Rohlfelder.
What does he say?
He says, if you don't get a prenuptial, you should have a psychiatrist. This is, he feels
I've
it should
actually
be so
had her
prevalent.
husband before me testify on the matter, and we showed videotapes of the closing of a prenuptial
I
agreement.
know the one you're talking about.
You know the one we're talking about.
Right. This is just as with wills, when they're thinking, is there any problem about the free will of the execution, and they're videotaping the execution of wills, there's a trend now to videotape these prenuptials.
Yes.
So that there's no question.
As to capacity to
as to
enter into
capacity and
affairs.
willingness and understanding the
Duress,
terms.
that's all taken care of in the
All the
videotape.
things
Marvelous
that somebody would bring a lawsuit and say, I signed it under duress, or I didn't understand, or I
Is it
didn't
your
read it.
opinion that every couple getting married should have this agreement?
I'll tell you my opinion. It's different from my husband's.
Okay, first yours.
I think that what I call the disadvantaged spouse, in other words, the spouse with less of the marital pot to begin with,
And less income.
is better served not to have an agreement, because the law will take better care of
You
him
heard it
or
here.
her. But there definitely is a movement afoot to have these agreements.
And Judge, what's your opinion? Should most couples have these agreements getting married?
I think they're probably useful for the majority of people who have some means. I think they're probably a waste for people where there really is no question as to what's going to happen in terms of equitable distribution or maintenance.
Okay. Now, Myrna, how do you weigh these two things? Here, let's assume again it's the man who has the money and the woman who's in love with the man.
Listen,
how do you
let's
weigh
assume
this?
for once that it's the woman who has the money. Wouldn't
Yes,
that be nice?
because this is a gender-neutral
And it
society.
happens.
Wonderful.
And it happens. The woman has the money, and what's your next question?
And the man,
Right.
obviously,
This poor schlub,
you've just advised him
Right?
that, in your opinion, you should not enter into this agreement.
Right.
That the court would take care of
Better
him.
care of him. Now, let me tell you
Right.
what happens. In many agreements, I've had them, I'm sure you've seen the scenario, you come to the point where one of the spouses is refusing to sign, and the other says, well, I'm not going to marry you if you don't sign. And sometimes they don't get married. And then sometimes the desire of the disadvantaged spouse is so great to get married that they'll sign anyway.
That's always that sword that's hanging over the head of the spouse, the potential spouse.
Right.
And if you don't
The
sign,
spouse-to-be.
I'm going to go to the spouse-to-be.
Right.
I'm going to go on to the next person.
Correct?
And what's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, the point...
I mean, no, very,
You know what?
very
I'm gonna
seriously.
tell you what's wrong with
if there's not enough basis of trust in terms and how the agreement is drawn, I think there's probably a very good probability they definitely will be on
Now
my
I'm gonna
matrimony.
We have to
Yeah.
take
My
a
After the
break
break.
now. We have to take a break now. Right after the break, we'll talk about this and equitable distribution. You're watching
Wonderful.
Law Line. I'm Alan Schnorman. Stay with us.
Why would anybody give someone they don't know a gift? They do it because this gift saves lives. And the need for it is desperate. We need over 20,000 people to give this precious gift every day. Please give blood. There's There's a life to be saved right now. Call the American Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. Today we're talking about divorce. If you're thinking of getting married, if you are married, this is the show to watch. We have Judge Walter Tollop, Acting Supreme Court Justice, New York County. And we also have Myrna Felder, a very well-known matrimonial attorney. Okay, we're talking about divorce. We're talking about equitable distribution. If somebody gets divorced, Judge,
Yes.
in the state of New York, what can they expect regarding the division of the assets?
Well, it depends on how long they've been married, what they have brought, what contribution they've made to the marriage, and
For
that contribution they made
Marriage
to the
of long
marriage.
duration. We're married 30 years. We
You
got
can
3
almost-
kids. The
you can
kids are out of the
almost-
house.
You can almost expect a 50-50 split.
Now, does the moneyed spouse have to give the person who's the homemaker any type of maintenance or anything?
There's provisions for
Just-
maintenance, and especially in a long-term marriage. Now, the traditional role has been, and this has been reversed many times, the male goes out into the business world, and he makes a small bundle, as it were, and the wife stays home and raises 2, 3 kids, what have you, and all of a sudden she's left at the end of this process now with skills that have not been utilized in 20, 25, 30 years in terms of whatever skills she had up front, and now she's not able to maintain herself, as it were, in the style to which she's been living.
We
all
used to
this
call it
period of time.
alimony, now it's maintenance.
Yeah, but it's called no longer alimony. Alimony was always forever.
maintenance not forever?
Maintenance doesn't have to be forever. It depends on the circumstances. In a marriage of long duration where one of the spouses is not able to re-enter the job market, where it can't be expected that these people will be able to support themselves, then you can expect maintenance of long duration or permanent maintenance.
Myrna, is that the
Right.
idea of maintenance now? It's supposed to
Sure.
be for a limited period of time until the...
No, that's not what the judge said. The judge said, you see, the statute before 1980, the only alimony that could be given was till death or remarriage. You couldn't say, oh, in this situation, this young woman, once the children are grown, is going to be able to go out and get a job and retrain. Let me give this person maintenance for 8 years.
Right.
You couldn't do that under the old statute. So now, under the new statute, you can give it for a definite period of time or till death or remarriage.
Judge, how do you determine whether it's 8 years, 10 years, 11 years?
Well, it depends on what the evidence shows, but basically you have a person who has been out of the job market for X amount of time. The first question is, can they get back into the job market? What can they do? What level can they expect to reach? There are people who will never reach the level that they were at when they first started. They were associates in major law firms, and they've gotten off the track. As a practical matter, once you're off that track, it's very, very hard to get back in, but you can find a job as a lawyer. So you make determinations based on expert evidence that you get.
Myrna, if they're splitting the assets in a long-term relationship down the middle, what happens if the man's in a cash business and he declares one thing on his tax returns, but the wife
These are
knows?
the interesting cases.
This is a great case.
These are the interesting cases to try. And sometimes the court has to say, well, ladies and gentlemen, I have an obligation to report this to my friends across the street
Is
in
that
the
right?
Internal Revenue
Well,
Service.
Is that your
It was
obligation?
better than, yeah, it's on my obligation. But I think Judge Sachs did it about, 2-3 years ago. Had a marvelous company that was doing a lot of cash. And unfortunately, the wife, the spouse, happened to be the bookkeeper. So you can imagine what that trial turned into. And like millions and millions of dollars of unreported income.
Myrna, if you're going to have a contested divorce in New York, how long does it take?
They all ask the same thing. And I can always answer
tell
in
them.
2 words. It depends.
Takes a long time, I guess.
But if you have a prenup, it can be shorter.
Not as it used to be.
Give me
now,
an idea, a range.
between 1 year and 2 years.
A year and 2 years is about very
Which is
accurate.
However,
superb
I've
when
heard
you measure
certain-
what used to be.
Myrna, I've heard certain instances of divorces carrying on more than 2 years, for
course.
3 years, 4 years, 5 years.
10
and one-
years.
10, 11 years.
What? How
I
can,
have one.
Right.
I have a
But
major.
what ingredients does a divorce have that carry on in the court system for 10 years?
Well, first of all, the parties are involved. And you have to understand, this is not like a business venture necessarily. We're dealing with people with passion. We're dealing with people who reconcile in the middle of a divorce. I have a case where the couple, about the 3rd year into the divorce, in a major divorce involving incredible assets, reconciled. So they reconciled for 2 years, but they never stopped the divorce action. So we were in a hiatus of 2 years. Of course, at the end of 2 years, they started fighting again. We're back into discovery. And discovery can be a very major factor when you're dealing with a lot of money over a long period of time in a long marriage of long duration.
Myrna, talking about money, you and your partner, your husband partner, Raoul Felder, I know,
Right.
a very well-known matrimonial firm. Everybody's always interested in money. How much does a divorce lawyer cost?
I got the same answer. It depends. But generally, here's what the story is. The lawyers now generally are paid on an hourly basis. When I first started, before 1980, a lawyer could give you a flat rate because they had an idea what the time was.
$5,000.
It depends on how many hours. So, for example, say the hourly rate is $3.50 an hour, $400 an hour, $4.50 an hour. You just figure out how many hours it takes. Now, I have had cases that have settled in an hour. You know, there's 1 hour. I've had cases that have settled in 10 hours. I've had cases that went on 8 or 9 years, you know.
I have a case that I just completed where I know for a fact that one spouse has already spent over $1 million in attorney's fees.
Okay, Judge, as you can imagine, most of the people viewing this show have
Right.
limited assets.
Right.
And not only could they not
As
pay
do
$1
I.
million in legal fees, but other things. The question I'm really trying to bring out is,
Here's the answer. I didn't even hear the question. I'm going to give you the answer. The answer is to be sensible with your lawyer, and if your spouse is sensible with their lawyer, the matter can be settled very easily and quickly. Doesn't cost a lot of money.
Maria, most
It's when
people-
they're litigated.
let's
that the
assume
costs go
we
up.
own a home, we
Right.
have a car, we have some money in the bank, but not a lot. We have our Kios, we
Right.
have our IRAs now,
Right.
and maybe the whole thing amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $200,000.
It should be
300.
divided in half, and that's it.
Divided in half, but let's assume we can't work out the terms.
Well, the clock is running. As long as you can't work out the terms, understand that the clock is running on both counsel's side. So
Now, one of the things that creative lawyers have begun, because lawyers don't want these cases to cost a fortune either. They want to efficiently manage the case. And one of the things that the New York County lawyers have been doing is, say there are 5 issues in a case, and they can settle 4, but one of them is breaking the back of the case. There's some issue that they can't resolve. They've been coming to the trial judge and saying, look, we have everything settled but that one issue. Would you be willing to just have a hearing on that one issue and bring it to closure in that way?
Are there other alternatives like mediation that a couple can go to that's cheaper for them?
Well,
mediation's a dirty word, by the way. You can't use that.
lawyers are concerned about mediation
Yeah.
because we've seen so many bad results. When it works the way it's supposed to, nothing better in this world. But when there's a dynamic in the marriage where one partner is really dominant, and the dynamic of the marriage is that the other is submissive, it's not a real mediation, because what happens is it replicates that one party calls all the shots, the other party
But we do have a
accepts it.
solution for you. We have a
Good.
neutral evaluator program in New York County, which is a pilot program that we're doing. Judge Gangle Jacobs organized it, and it has recruited a number of very, very prominent lawyers in the matrimonial field to act as neutral evaluators. And what happens is I'll make a recommendation out of my part. It'll go down for assignment to a neutral evaluator. This will be a prominent member in the matrimonial field who was not in any manner, shape, or form connected with the case. They'll go to neutral evaluation, and they'll come back with some recommendations from persons that they have a lot of respect for. There is no charge for this program.
It's certainly something that...
Right.
And-
what it does is when you have a case, and the reason why you can't settle that 5th issue is the lawyer on the other side doesn't know what it's really worth. If they come to a neutral evaluator, the neutral evaluator says, you're wrong on this. You know, you're
Right.
not going to succeed on this. They can
Bring
give
it
in
closer
on
to
that, finish it up.
Myrna, now I know you represent famous people, you represent rich people,
And infamous people,
and infamous
too.
people.
Infamous people.
What is it? Is it
And they're
any
not so
diff-
rich after they finish with me, either.
What is
Sorry.
it like? Is it any different representing a famous actor or
I'll tell
actress
you
than
what's
anyone else?
I'll tell you what's interesting. The big cases, the big money cases, give you the pleasure of lawyering, because there are many, many issues that get involved that they can afford, literally afford, to have the lawyers litigate, take up on appeal, get a resolution. In many other cases where people are of modest circumstance, they may be right on an issue, the trial judge makes the wrong ruling, they can't afford to start appealing and doing all the other things.
I had a case this morning, as a matter of fact, that had about a dozen good issues. Of course, we settled for about $4,400, so it wasn't quite worth spending the time and the effort going through that
Judge,
whole...
are most contested matrimonials settled at one point before a decision is
Most
made?
contested matrimonials are settled, yes. Because somewhere along the line, this bolt of lightning comes out of the blue and hits the people right in the head and says, you know, this is nonsense, this is crazy. Maybe it wasn't worth all this revenge that I'm trying to get.
At what point do most cases settle?
Well, most cases settle, really contested matrimonials will settle once they start coming into the courtroom and they've got to face me.
For trial.
Or a jury from time to time.
Call your
We have a
first
full-
witness.
Call your first witness settles
That
a lot of
does it.
cases. And then you get into the middle of this hassle from time to time and it settles then.
Well,
and then some go all the way through. I mean,
Is it always a matter of just money?
Oh, no. Oh, for heaven's sake.
Oh, no,
That's
no.
what
If
makes
these people had-
matrimonial law so wonderful.
This is passion-driven.
Right.
If these people had any common sense, they'd never get into the courtroom.
If it was only
It'll be
a
an
question of
uncontested
money,
matrimonial.
it
Oh.
could be settled many times. It's because
Sure.
there's an emotional overlay. They just can't bear to part with this particular painting.
Right.
He live in the house,
We've had people argue
impossible.
over ashtrays. Huh?
That's
And
right.
it's crazy. When they get down, and you know you really, when you're making progress, when you get down to arguing over the ashtrays and the silver.
Right, you're
Because
almost
then you've
finished.
gotten over most of the
Right.
major hurdles. But it's passion, it's driven. He's taking advantage of me, or she's taking advantage of me, or, I mean, this is what goes on. This is what makes matrimonial so fascinating.
What happens if the one spouse makes all the money, the other spouse does not? Who pays her legal fees, or his legal fees, who doesn't earn the monies?
There's two different issues here. If at the end of the case, the property is equally divided, each will pay their own counsel fees, except if one party has delayed it or, been tactically obstructive. But while the case is going on, the disadvantaged spouse can get an award for their fees so that they're on an equal playing field
Yes.
with the
We try to make an equal
spouse.
playing field, as it were.
Marina, what's your advice to anybody out there who is...
You're so
They're-
funny. In
they're
my mind is coming
Are
the
we
words,
building to
don't
this?
get married.
and you heard it here on Lawline. They're contemplating divorce, and let's assume it is the wife who's not making the big bucks,
I'll
and
give
she
you the
knows
advice.
excuse me, and she knows nothing about how the money is earned. They don't even. She signs the tax returns, but really hasn't got the concept. The tax return is this thick. What's your advice?
My advice is don't wait till the moment that you decide to get out of the marriage. Go for a consultation with a lawyer the first time there's any hint of discord so that you can get some advice on how to proceed and protect your rights.
And Judge, what's your advice to the same viewers?
I think it probably would be the very same advice. Find a lawyer that you can trust in who's going to give you some advice up front before you get into trouble.
And how do you know the attorney? Should you go to a specialist in matrimony?
Yes.
Oh, definitely. Do not find out the names of a couple of attorneys and try them out, if you will. Not everybody charges the same rates. You've got to find someone that you can afford, number one, and number two, someone that you can relate to.
Judge Walter Tollip, Acting Supreme Court Justice, New York County, thank you for being on Lawline once again. And Myrna Felder,
Pleasure.
thank you for being
Pleasure.
on Lawline. And as always, this is Alan Schnorman. Thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law.